Welcome in, everybody, to Inside the Borough. It's been a minute, but we are back. Robbie LaStella, Richard Pereira, joined by a very special guest here on this one, Mayor of Boca Raton, longtime Florida Atlantic University supporter, professor, Mayor Andy Thomson on with us here today. Andy, thank you so much for taking some time. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. It's my honor. Thank you for having me.
Of course. It's been an exhilarating couple of weeks here for you, so we do really appreciate you carving out some time. But kind of diving right into that, I mean, I think the race itself made national news, kind of how tightly contested it was there. How was that for you from your perspective? Myself personally, I've only done I was 8th grade class president and I ran uncontested. So I don't know anything about these tightly contested races. How did that kind of feel from your perspective? A lot of anxiety there. How did that go down?
Well, first, thank you for your service as 8th grade class president. Remarkably, the situation we found ourselves in this race was the exact same situation I had been in previously when I was first elected in 2018, believe it or not, where it was a very close race. The night of the election, it seemed like we may have lost. It turns out they hadn't finished counting the votes yet. And when they did finish counting, which back in 2018 was the next day, but this year it was that night, it showed that I was up, though it was very close, and it proceeded to do a recount, which later confirmed that I had won. So that same kind of roller coaster of emotions, and I know everybody was feeling it. I had been through that exact trajectory just a few years ago and had won in a recount in 2018. So believe it or not, this was something that we had gotten, I don't want to say we were prepared for. We were expecting it not to be quite so close, but it was something that we were certainly capable of withstanding and dealing with. And I actually had pretty much the same team help me during the recount process this time as what had happened in 2018.
It sounds like, experience is always a good thing, whether that's in politics or in athletics. We just got covered. I just finished seeing Dusty May win a national championship, and experience played a role in that one too. But do you feel like your time at FAU, whether it be as a supporter or a professor, kind of was a benefit to you during this tightly contested race, whether that's, vote count or, just understanding kind of different types of issues that residents of this city may have?
It was absolutely a benefit. And I've told people this before. So I've been a professor, an adjunct professor at FAU since 2022. And I've caught every semester, fall and spring, basically since then. And what it's done for me in my public service has been really, really important, because I have 5 children ranging in ages from 14 to 5. So I have I have the young folks covered in my own household. A lot of our friend group, my wife and I, are folks in our same age, bracket, as you can imagine. So 30s and 40s. So we kind of have that group covered. Many of my neighbors are a little bit older than that, and folks that vote typically in local elections in particular tend to be on the older side. So basically, the entire spectrum, in terms of voters in particular, I have a great deal of access to and experience dealing with. But there was one segment that I really didn't quite have covered, and that was like the high school and college age. So when I've been able to have the class that I've taught, local and state government, which again, I've taught several semesters now, I think maybe 8 or 6 or something like that. I've gotten a nice window into that perspective of folks who are going through the late teens, early 20s timeframe, which I didn't have a lot of friends or acquaintances in that age group. So the idea that I get now to have a kind of focus group almost every class that I have on issues that are facing us at the local level has been very, very valuable. And it gives me an insight to how they view the world, which is, as you can imagine, quite different than somebody in their early 40s, views the world, and quite different, obviously, than somebody in their 70s or 80s views the world. So that's been really, really helpful to me. And I think it proved to be very beneficial in this last race in 2026.
It's definitely kind of awesome to hear about that. I mean, I feel like the outside perspective of Boca Raton is that it's a retirement type community. And I've lived in Boynton Beach, Delray Beach, but I went to school in Boca since I was a tot time. I went to Advent Lutheran St. John Paul and then Florida Atlantic. So there's people who grow up in this community and definitely have, investments in it personally. And so kind of getting your opinion on that, though, how important is it for young people in this area, FAU students, Palm Beach State students, even those who aren't in the college programs, to speak out and have an opinion on what matters to them?
It matters a lot. It is critically important. And unfortunately, and I see this in my own class, I always typically start. I remember these people, these are students, typically political science students. That's the class, that's where the class falls. And these are people who are studying political science and have chosen, they're not required to, they've chosen to take a local and state politics or government class. So I asked them in the very first class each semester, who here can name the president? Obviously, everybody can name the president. Who here can name the governor? Okay, just about everybody, especially now. But then as we get down into members of Congress, who can name that, where you live? Most can. These are folks who are paying attention to that. You start asking about who's your state representative, who's your state senator, and then you get really blank stares when you ask who's your county commissioner. And the most blank stares of all is when you ask who is your mayor if you live in a municipality. And folks just average, that doesn't have to be young people, everybody tends to not be that focused on that, which is unfortunate because on the flip side, I also walk them through kind of this thought exercise that asks about, the first thing you did this morning, what was it? What did you do? Well, for most people, it's like they turned on the light switch or they went to the bathroom or they went and got something out of the refrigerator or something like that. And we walk through what the beginning of every person's day, how it typically goes. Typically it involves electricity, water, sewer, sanitation. It involves driving on a road, going to a building, and a whole variety of other things, all of which are not legislated or governed by the federal government or the state government. They're typically all those things that I mentioned, whether it's roads or utilities or the combination of things, but it's water, sewer. If you're going through something which would require you to call 911 or seek public safety assistance, that's all of these things are all local level. And so the reason I do that is to bring to mind the fact that so much of our everyday lives is governed and dealt with at a local level. And yet so few people, if they care at all about government, spend time thinking about local government. And that's a bridge that I've been trying in my own way to try and get into a gap I'm trying to bridge for the last however long I've been in public service. And this is no less true, by the way, for college students going to FAU or Lynn or Palm Beach State, because they still drive on the same roads. They still need to have public safety respond quickly, no less than anyone else, maybe even more actually. They are no less impacted by decisions regarding the environment around them or the buildings that are being built or things like traffic and how we allocate recreational resources, all of that. All of that matters just as much, if not more so, to a young person living life in a vibrant way than it does to anyone else. But there is this huge drop off when it comes to young people, particularly college age folks, voting. And unfortunately, despite my efforts, that's not necessarily been, there hasn't been a huge improvement of that at FAU. I do my best, and I have lots of friends who come and attend FAU, and I'm sure they all vote. They all tell me that they did. But it's one of those things that I wish that across the board, not just at FAU, it's not an FAU problem. It's just that age group doesn't tend to be that invested when it comes to their local government and local decision making, which is a shame, unfortunately, because decisions are made by those who show up. And so few people show up at local government elections anyway. And I made the point to FAU students in particular. I've said that if FAU students who live near, and there's 25,000 people that go to the Boca Raton campus, right? Not all of them live in Boca Raton, as you know. Many live in Deerfield or Delray or Boynton. But if just the ones who lived in Boca registered to vote in the municipality in which they live and took the time out of their days on election day to go and vote, they could, by most accounts, elect whomever they want. They would control local elections if they mobilized, organized, and actually went out and voted with regularity, because they could get whatever they want done at the local level done if they were to do that. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened that way yet. I'm trying to push them to do it. Maybe over the next few years, we'll get to see some more progress there.
Mayor Thomson, first off, congrats on your election victory. Looking forward to seeing what you can accomplish in office at the position. Second, I'm peeping the FU football helmet in the background. That's very nice to see.
Oh, yeah, I have my daughter, Charlie, here. She's 7, just got finished with gymnastics. You want to wave a little hi? There you go.
Hello. But yeah, it's great to see that. And speaking of FU, you've been directly involved with FU as an adjunct professor since 2022, especially in the politics department, getting to know the ins and outs of the university throughout your stint there, getting to interact with students, faculty, and university officials on a daily basis. What do you view to be FU's greatest strengths? And how do you intend on helping the university continue to grow its name as Boca Raton mayor?
I have been really impressed by the growth and the trajectory of FAU since I've been paying attention, although my connection to FAU goes way back beyond when I first when I became a professor in 2022, or when I got elected for the first time in 2018. My parents met at FAU in the 1960s. The school was just a few years open for just a few years. They met in the library, fell in love, got married, and I'm the result. And so while I didn't go to FAU, nobody's perfect, it does have a very strong degree of importance for me and my family, because like if there's no FAU, there's no me. I don't exist. So back then, as you guys know, FAU was a very, very different place. It was obviously much smaller, but it was almost entirely a commuter school, a finishing school, as they called it back then, where folks could get the last 2 years of the degree and graduate with a bachelor's. And now look at it. You're talking about tens of thousands of people coming to it every day, thousands of employees, staff members, faculty teaching there. It is its own economic engine in our city. It probably is still the biggest employer in town, and if not, it's one of them, obviously. And so it has an enormous amount of importance to our city, not just me personally, but to the city. And unfortunately, over the course of time, the city's been around for 100 years. School's been around for not quite as long, but a long time. But it's grown significantly, as has the city. Unfortunately, the city hasn't really known or figured out how to handle the fact that FAU is growing to be the juggernaut that it is. And there hasn't always been a very strong relationship between the two. I mean, they've been cordial, and as you guys maybe have been the ones that pointed out, like there's been times when the city is really quick to latch on to the good associated with FAU, particularly in the athletics, right? But also in like when we became an R1 research institute, that kind of thing. Whenever FAU's done great, we want to be quick to point it out. But I'm not sure the city's always been so good at keeping up its end of being a good neighbor. And so, unfortunately, that had probably been the case for a lot of the city's recent history. But we have some new folks in positions of leadership now at the city, both me as mayor, but also our city manager. A lot of our high-level staff members are new. And so I think that kind of old thinking is no longer the prevailing view, because these folks have never known FAU to be anything besides the juggernaut and, the growing institution on the trajectory that it's been going. And that's a good thing, I think, and it allows us to have, and plus we have the new leadership at FAU with President Hasner. We have an opportunity now to make sure that the city and the university strengthen the relationship, that we can become, we're more than just neighbors. Like that's not even really doing it justice. Like we are really core, integral parts of each other, because without the university, the city would be a much different place, and vice versa. We have a chance now to really strengthen those bonds and make a lot of improvements, or not even around the edges necessarily, but like in really important parts of the university's ecosystem, but also the city's ecosystem.
Yeah, a lot of people in FU circles that feel previous leadership loved to enjoy the benefits of FU at sporting events, especially with the Final Four run in 2023. They had events dedicated to celebrating that run to the Final Four in Houston for March Madness, and whenever football is doing good with the bowl game appearances and such. But when it came time to build infrastructure for FU students, there was little to no support. We all know 2020 Street never took off, and the city blocked student housing off its street, with Mayor Scott Singers quoted saying that student housing is a FU problem, quote unquote. Moving forward, where do you stand on helping FU students with housing and having the growth of college-focused businesses?
It's a great question. Well, in going back to one of the situations you mentioned, which was that we did have an opportunity several years ago to build at least some additional off-campus student aligned housing right across the street from the university. It was a perfect situation. There cannot be any greater or better place to have students live than literally across Fifth Street, particularly when the developer at the time was going to build a pedestrian bridge to allow students literally to walk to campus. I was one of the champions for that. I thought it made a ton of sense, and I can get into the reasons why. But because the nature of the request required more than just a simple majority, it required 4 members of the 5-member city council, it failed because although 3 members supported it, 2 of them, including the mayor at the time, did not support it. And I remember the quote that you just mentioned, which was something to the effect of, the housing issues that are facing FAU students are not the city's problem. Factually, I think that that's not true, because it is the city's problem. It's everybody's problem, but it's no less of the city's problem, because, think about it this way. You have FAU students who have no choice. There's obviously limited beds on campus, and not everybody want to live on campus anyway, beyond, their freshman, maybe sophomore year. And you have limited apartments that are student style. It can't be strictly student apartments. Like, we have housing laws that would prevent that, but it's geared towards students. And you have really limited options. You have University Park, and that's pretty much it. You have others nearby, but none that are strictly student geared. And so what you have happen now is you have students have no choice but to find other ways to get to other places to live in and around campus, which, by the way, is its own challenge because of the high cost of living that we have in Boca, and we're taking measures to address that also. But they're choosing, because they have no other choice, to live in single-family communities or apartments scattered among other, non-students. And that comes with some attendant consequences, right? Because, somebody in the college stage of life does tend to, live life a little bit differently than somebody in their 70s or 80s. And so you have a whole deal of things that the city has to deal with because of that. And I thought it made a ton of sense from the beginning. It made a ton of sense to have students that are attending FAU, and for that matter, Palm Beach State, if they're going to be looking for housing near the campus, because everybody would like to ideally live near campus and not have to commute a long ways, have them congregated, not interspersed among the single family neighborhoods, but it congregated right next to the campus. It made so much sense because it would drive down costs that the city has to bear when it comes to things like public safety calls or transportation related issues. When particularly you have a student housing developer, who wanted to help take cars off the road by providing a bridge there for students to be able to bike or walk onto campus, which was right across the street. It made so much sense that it was shocking to me that it didn't pass. And I'm embarrassed, frankly, from the city's perspective, that it didn't. Would it have solved the entirety of the off-campus student housing situation? No, of course not. It wasn't, 7,000 units. It was a few hundred. But it would have made at least a small dent in the problem. It would have shown that this is something that the city was willing to support and that we would be good neighbors along with the university. And unfortunately, though it didn't pass, I still hold out hope that not that one site, because I think there have been other plans that have been approved for that site. But there are other opportunities near the university that could be good places and locations for additional student geared housing that I would happily support, because this is something that we need to keep addressing. And it's not a situation where we're just going to be like FAU's on its own or the students are on their own. They have to figure that out on their own. No, that's not how that's not responsive local government, in my view. So we're going to keep doing our best to try and address that and provide opportunities for the private sector to build student aligned housing in that way close to campus. Now, you also mentioned 20th Street, Richard, and that's also a good point. I have been pushing for the staff and my colleagues to start getting serious about ways we can redevelop 20th Street to make it more of a college town style area, like you would see basically in every other university. And the city, unfortunately, just doesn't have that. The interesting part there is that it's a function too of the property owners and their willingness to invest in changes, like to redevelop the area. Because the city doesn't like redevelop private property for them. Like, they have to want to do it. But we can provide incentives that would make it more it would induce them to have, for example, some mix of uses where you had first floor retail that is being geared towards college students, but then apartments on top where, floors 2, 3, 4, 5. That could allow for some off-campus options for students to live, but also provide the kinds of needed retail components that you would want to have, and that aren't necessarily on campus already. It makes so much sense, all the sense in the world, to do that right on 20th Street. And we're not talking about miles and miles of runway there. You're talking about just a finite area where it makes a bunch of sense, because you do have where the housing situation over there, I'm sure, has a lot of students as it is. So you'd have a really, really nice critical mass there of college themed, college geared redevelopment. And I'm hoping we can get to that place in the near future. As one of you guys mentioned, there have been some interesting developments in the election cycle this past year that we have to address some other things probably in the nearest term. But I'm hoping once the dust settles on all of that, and we can get past the discussion about what's happening on the City of Boca's government campus, which took all of the oxygen out of the room for the last year or so, we can get back to the basics and handle the kinds of needs that we have that are growing no less needed, chief among them being 20th Street and the redevelopment of that area there.
Great answer. And, among the many topics that you will handle, there's going to be a lot that will be on your radar throughout your term as Boca Raton mayor, some more urgent than others. And a lot is going to involve multitasking since you'll have a lot of responsibilities on your plate. That being said, how will you make sure that issues involving FEU will get the attention and care it deserves to help the university get better when it comes to their growth in athletics and at the local level in Boca Raton?
Another great question. So part of that has to do with, I have in my role, having been in local government now since 2018 and being a professor there, I have a uniquely strong relationship both with the incoming president, Adam Hazard, but also the government relations folks at the university. So Ryan Britton is the head. He's the one in charge of making sure that the state, the county, the city, the relationship is really strong. And from my perspective, we have a really nice chance now to strengthen that significantly. On the athletics front, I'm blessed to have to know and have gotten to know over the course of time both the basketball and the football head coaches. These are guys, young up and coming coaches who really do care about the programs here, but really this community. They're invested in this place, which is a great, great thing. And just the same way that Dusty was, for example, that's the kind of the promise that I see in the guys that are there now. We need to make sure that this community really does, and there's really no excuse for it, frankly, historically, that we have this fantastic football stadium. We have a very entertaining program and football team that is competitive. But when it comes to Saturday afternoons or evenings, unfortunately, this is South Florida, and people just seem to find other things to do than going to the games. I have myself and my family have gone to an increasing number of games over the course of time. And we go into every single game? No. But we need to make sure that the city does its best to communicate the fact that we have a elite level, up and coming basketball and football program here in town that plays a great game and is offering a fantastic experience to people at least in the football setting, is a fantastic venue. Basketball could use some upgrades, and that I know and I'm sure the long-term vision of Brian White and the folks at the athletics department. But we have a really good product, and we need to make sure that the city is highlighting that for folks, and not just when we go to the Final Four or when we go to the Boca Raton Bowl like we did under Lane Kiffin, but across the board. And you have my word that I'm going to be a champion for that, and making sure that folks know that FAU is our hometown university. And if you haven't been in a while, you got to come check it out. Come see what the experience is like. Bring the family, bring the kids, because it is a wonderful experience, particularly for young kids. The time that my kids have at the football games is better than they have I guess we don't go that often to the Dolphins, right? Because the price point's a little different. But my kids have the same level of fun, if not more so, at the FAU games than they do at any other team at any other level.
Kind of building off that, you mentioned obviously the attendance issue at times, but if it can get to a point where the attendance is improving, the local community really starts to invest and buy into to everything that's going on with athletics. How much does that kind of, in your opinion, boost the local economy, whether that's local tourism, impacting, restaurants, shops, all that kind of stuff? If things really start to go that way, do you feel like that could boost Boca as a whole?
Absolutely. You want to know how I know that is during the Final Four, I didn't have the blessing of going out to where they were playing. I saw all of their games on TV, right, during the entire NCAA tournament run. But the last several rounds of it, I think at least the Final Four and the Elite Eight in the final, at least the Final Four games, I watched all of them at the Ale House on Yamato Road. And let me tell you, during the Final Four game when I was there, every single person was there to watch FAU. That was the only reason they were in that building. And that's just one of many places around town that I'm sure said that during that level, that period of the tournament. So right there, you saw retail and restaurant establishments benefiting massively. And you know what? It was it was tough to describe. It was like a community building event. Everybody was there to watch and root for FAU. Every basket, people were cheering. It was like nothing I'd ever seen when it came to FAU sports before. And that was just one location in one restaurant. Who knows how many dozens of others that was true for during that period of time. So absolutely it boosts the economic, the economy here in Boca when that kind of success, that was unique level of success, right? Like it's tough for us to replicate that every year. Like no team goes to the Final Four every year. But that level of success not only has an enormous impact on the economy, it brings the community together in a way that was really rich and something that, look, here we are 3 years later talking about it. And so and I was doing the same thing, just a little, I forget when it was. It must've been this morning. Yeah. This morning at a breakfast meeting, we were talking about the Final Four run. Like that was something that really had an enormous impact on us here in Boca Raton. And we're not going to forget that.
No, it's impossible to forget. I didn't go to FAU for the athletics. I hate to say that. I came because it was my local school and my friends went, and I left a diehard FAU athletics fan and with a sense of community, like you mentioned. And, where else I got my sense of community at FAU, and you may not necessarily have an opinion on it, but I do want to ask, considering Greek life is a big portion of FAU's kind of social atmosphere at the athletic events and as a whole, really. And the housing situation for Greek life is a little different than the housing situation in general. So I'm not necessarily going to focus on that, but from your perspective, is Greek life a positive thing that you support at the university? And is there a way that the city and the Greek, the organizations at the school can kind of work together in a way that hasn't happened before?
I wasn't in a fraternity myself when I was in college, but I had lots of friends who were, and they were absolutely sold that was one of the best parts of their college experience. So I agree that obviously it's a benefit for everybody if they're involved in Greek life, like to somehow take them away, you would feel the absence and it wouldn't be a good thing, right? The housing situation does get tricky. And, historically, a lot of places when they have housing for the fraternities and sororities, it tends to be on campus, not exclusively, but in a lot of places it does. And so we don't have that situation here. And that's not a situation that the city is involved in. Like we don't control one way or the other anything that happens on state property that's owned by FAU. The off-campus housing situation would maybe some challenges there, but look, I'm not the type. Let's put it this way. Unlike some others who have been involved before, I'm not the type that's just going to bury my head in the sand when it comes to not wanting to confront problems. I want to confront them head on and see if we can figure out a solution that makes it work. So this is not going to be something that just simply gets avoided.
That's good to hear. It's a very complicated issue. I was on the executive board there for 2 years, and Greek housing is something that'll take a long time to evaluate. But it's good to hear a forward-thinking approach with it. Kind of gearing down a little bit on the FAU type questions. But considering, how it seemed like it was important to the university when I was graduating, at least, to try to find jobs in the local area. How important, in your perspective, is that to try to, keep graduates in this area and maybe, incentivize local businesses, if that's a possibility, to work with FAU and try to find a home for the young graduates, especially in a market where it's not easy right now for entry level.
No, it's not. It's one of my priorities as mayor, and the reason is I have, like I mentioned, my oldest is 14, so pretty soon she's going to go to high school next year. She's actually going to go to FAU High, so she's going to be an FAU grad at some point. And what kind of hurts every time I see it, and it's a lot of my friends are a little bit older than my age group, but when our friends' kids go to FAU and they immediately leave, it just creates kind of a heartache, because a lot of the reason why there tends to come down to two things. One is the cost of living here and be able to find housing. That's one thing, but also is the difficulty they've had in finding a good paying job here in the immediate area. Like it has to be strictly Boca. I would love it if it was, but like in the immediate area. So one of the things that I care most about is putting an end to that, the brain drain, where we have the students who come here, love the environment in the city of Boca Raton, would by all accounts wish they could stay, but just cannot be, they can't find a way to make it work because they can't either afford to be here or they can't find a job that would sustain them being here. We can address both of those, and we need to. But on the job front, the question you asked, absolutely, one of my top priorities is going to be finding a way to get Boca back to its, historically, this is back maybe long before you were there, but Boca was an innovation hub with IBM. And that was a place where very good jobs were being paid to very smart people from all around the country, but a lot of local folks were able to be able to benefit from that. I want to see us be in the same. It's not going to be IBM anymore, right? IBM is gone, but we're on the cusp, I think, of having Boca become that kind of innovation hub again, in whether it's AI, quantum computing, the defense industry. There's a lot of folks that want to come to South Florida now, in Palm Beach County in particular. Boca Raton can absolutely be a beneficiary of that if we make sure that we make it clear to folks that we want that kind of investment from employers of that sort to be in our community. I'm doing my best in my week on the job or so to start communicating that out to people, because I want to make sure that we have high quality employers here that can either relocate or expand here. You do that, you're offering potentially more jobs to our FAU grads that they can then find a job here and stay here. And I think that's the best possible scenario.
You mentioned you've only been on the job for a week, but the passion, you can hear it about FAU, about young people, and that's not always the case. So I do hope, listeners pick up on that, because I certainly am. But in terms of, that you mentioned you've been around FAU for a long time. You've been involved in the community. What would your advice be? These are a little easier ones here, winding down. But what would your advice be to a freshman coming into FAU? Not the life advice. I'm sure everyone can give them life advice, but how would they, in your way, how would they enjoy Boca Raton? What's the best way to enjoy Boca?
It's a good question. They're all good questions, guys. I really appreciate this time that we're having together. Well, how would they best appreciate, or how would they best enjoy Boca Raton? Well, that's an interesting question, because it has to do with the fact, one, that we're in South Florida, which means you have everything's available to you under the sun. People could choose to go to college in a lot of different places, even if they went some other place in Florida. If you say you went to Gainesville or Tallahassee, no shade at them, but like your options are limited when it comes to finding things to do there. There is no shortage of anything to do in our metropolitan area, not necessarily just exclusively Boca. But our metropolitan area, there's everything available to you. And so the best part about Boca, I think, is that its quality of life, I think, is better than, again, no shade anywhere else, including our neighbors, than just about any other place in our area, because it combines things like fantastic amenities, great weather. Obviously, we don't control that. But it doesn't have, it's not as big and bustling as a place like Miami or West Palm Beach. And a lot of people love that. I'm sure there was a stage in my life where I was looking for that more than when I look for now, when I have 5 kids and when I just want to have a safe, suitable place for them to grow up. But for the college age student, I think the best part of Boca Raton has got to be our recreation. And we have everything, every kind of available recreation you can think of. Obviously, we have our beaches, and they're like some of the best. But we also have the ability to go and spend time on the water, on the Intercoastal. You have the chance with the no matter what kind of sport you want to play, we have some of the best possible parks that you give rise to the places where you can do these things. So anybody who likes to spend time outdoors, I mean, we don't have like hiking here, like we're not on a mountain, but everything short of that, I think we have it, and it's like its highest elite level here in Boca Raton. So I think my guess is if people are choosing to come to college, if say they're from outside the area, like you, I'm from here. I'm from Coral Springs originally. So like this was always my area, and I understood what South Florida was. But a lot of people choose to come from other parts of the state where it's not quite so close, or other parts of the country. If they've done that, they're choosing to be in a warm tropical climate that allows you to be outdoors all year round. And so Boca provides a unique ability to take advantage of that, maybe better so than a lot of other places, even in Florida or South Florida does.
Agree with you 100%. I mean, you mentioned the parks. Patch Reef Park for basketball. You get a lot of guys who come down here from New York, New Jersey, that type of stuff where, you're playing basketball out there. And then, I'm thinking New York, Rucker Park. Patch Reef may not be Rucker Park, but you can get some good games out there. And you look for that sense of community. You'll meet the same people out there every Thursday, Friday night playing basketball. And you mentioned we can't hike, but you can walk through Gumbo Limbo. And there's a lot of great stuff, and that's a great answer, and people really should take the most of that. But you mentioned you've only been on the job for a week. I'm going to give you a hypothetical here. You got a really tough decision coming your way, but you only have 2 advisors available to you, Andy. Lane Kiffin or Dusty May. Who are you leaning on for advice in that situation, and why?
It's not. Remember the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You could phone a friend, right? It sounds kind of like that, and I think my answer would depend on the subject matter, because I do think that the two individuals you mentioned, Dusty and Lane, are pretty different, right? And have obviously significant skill sets when it comes to coaching their respective sports, but like pretty different kind of guys, right? So if the question has to do with offensive flair, I think you got to go with Lane, because that guy was an offensive genius, right? Like his family was, right? So that's an easy one when it comes to anything having to do with putting points on the board. If it has to do with organizational structure, or if it has to do with, let's start with that. Then I think I have to give the nod to Dusty, because he put together a fantastic team of assistants around him who have, in their own rights, and it's probably no less true for Lane, but I'm going to give some props to Dusty, who've gone on and done significant things in other universities. A lot of them went with him up to Michigan, but not all did. And he had a very unique ability to bring in high quality assistants around him and get great levels of great advice from the people, and have individual coaches that could coach their positions in a way that, I think, set us up for pretty significant success here at FAU. So I think they both have many advantages, and I don't think I could go wrong by getting advice from either of them. But that's kind of how I see the two of them. And the truth is, I knew Dusty a little bit better than I knew Lane. I knew of a lot of Lane's assistants. I went to church with several of them, and he had a really good team around him too. So, the truth is, I couldn't go wrong either way.
I couldn't see either of them ever dipping their toe into politics, if we're being honest. They're good at what they're good at what they got, and I do appreciate the analogy. But Andy, I got one more for you, and it might be the most important one. Let's say you had a college student's budget in Boca. Where are you going to grab a bite to eat? It can be breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I'm not picky, but you got a college student budget to work with. So where are you going to lunch?
That one's easy.
Breakfast or dinner.
I would go to the Irishman. That's a place that's been very good to FAU over the course of time. Rossa, their owner, is fantastic, loves his community in a big way. I remember at a time when, this is going back several years, first of all, his restaurant is, and he and his restaurant are extremely philanthropic and charitable, always helping out causes around town just for the asking. But I remember he was in a tough spot back in 2020 when COVID hit. Remember, that was March of 2020. Well, what else also falls in March? St. Patrick's Day, the biggest day of the year for an Irish pub, as you can imagine. But this guy, despite all of the incentives to do the opposite and to keep things open and to go, he made the safe choice, which wasn't easy, and I'm sure he paid the price financially for it. But I'll never forget that. Like, this is a guy who knew what he had to do. He did the right thing in accordance with all the guidelines at the time, and was willing to put his money where his mouth was when it comes to caring about the community and making sure that that thing we got past it in a safe way. So the city appreciated how he handled that. And I've always been quick to try and get Rossa as much support and business and props as is possible. So my answer would definitely be hit up the Irishman right there on 2nd Avenue. You can't miss it, right down the street from FAU.
That's an awesome choice. I think I've been there more times than I can count. I eat like a child when I get there, though. I go get my chicken tenders and my French fries with the honey mustard. It's great, but they got the Irish classics too. I think you can get a shepherd's pie if your heart desires.
Shepherd's pie used to be $5 on Tuesday nights. It's not the case anymore, I don't think. That's a supply chain. Those are macro issues. That's not him. He's doing the best he can, but for sure, that for a college student's budget, that'd be the best spot.
There you go. Mayor Andy Thomson. Andy, thank you so much for taking some time. We greatly appreciate it. And you got some long-term supporters of us here on FAU Owl's Nest. And best of luck here in your term.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Richard. Had a blast. I can't wait to do it again sometime.
We'll talk soon. For Mayor Andy Thomson, that's Richard Pereira. I'm Robbie LaStella. We'll see you guys on Inside the Borough next time.